Empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? First 6 seconds, point A to point B, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go.
Welcome to the Scoop World Order. It is Sunday night. We got a little spring ball edition, transfer portal edition, summertime edition, baby. It's almost camp season. It's always hot around the Scoop around June. We've got all these recruiting camps coming up. Super excited about that. So we're going to dive right into it because we have a ton of content tonight. So we'll run through 30 minutes before I even blink twice. So I'm going to get right into it. But again, I always start the program off. Thank you so much. You guys are the best. Keep commenting. Keep giving us support. The likes add up. The subscribes add up. Hit the alert button for the bell. It all makes a huge difference in our product. We're exploding in growth. Again, thank you guys so much. On this one, comment who were your biggest surprises of the spring. Was it Jim Knowles' defense? Was it Jack Sawyer's dominant performance? What did you see that you liked? What are you nervous about? Just your initial feelings as we've had a couple weeks since the spring game to marinate a little bit, and as we get into these recruiting camps. So with that, I'm going to bring in my good friend Nevadabuck. Nevada, how are you tonight?
Doing great. Doing good. Lots of things going on in Ohio State world, and just coming off a really exciting NFL draft, which told us a lot about Ohio State, told us a lot about other teams in college football. And so just really, exciting times to be a sports fan and an Ohio State fan for sure.
We weren't really going to talk much about the draft, but just give me a couple, 2-3 overview points about the draft. Obviously the receivers went very early for Ohio State. Haskell Garrett did not get drafted. Give me a couple of your Ohio State viewpoints from the draft and how it was a great commercial for our offense, especially our throwing game.
Well, anytime you have 3 wide receivers, and I do count Jameson Williams as an Ohio State Buckeye, going, you just can't get a better endorsement or really specific of what Hartline's doing for the wide receiver room, and that's just going to pay big dividends. We're just going to continue to feast on wide receivers as we're going forward, and I and you can see that kids are buying what he's selling, and you've got great quarterbacks, you've got great wide receivers, you got great prospects across the board, and it's really a tribute to him. It's also the offensive line, having Nick Petit-Frere going to the 3rd round. I thought that was a great spot for him, and maybe he's not as high as some people thought going into this year, or when he was kind of earning an All-American status, but I thought that was pretty good. Having Rucker drafted as well. So you've got a lot of players in the Ohio State offense. Not so many on the defense, and I think that's really sometimes things aren't obvious, and people kind of miss the subtleties. But this one wasn't subtle at all. The offense was talented. The defense just didn't have guys that were really making an impact, making a difference, and I think the NFL draft kind of bore that out.
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Smith went in the 5th round, which is honestly earlier than I thought he went, and Haskell Garrett did not get drafted at all, which was slightly surprising. I mean, Haskell's an undersized guy, but I figured they'd find a spot for him maybe in the 6th or 7th round, but he did not get drafted. He ended up also in Tennessee with Nick Petit-Frere. I think Nick Petit-Frere is in the absolute perfect spot. I thought that he played better at right tackle than left tackle. They've got Taylor Lewan there. It's a run-heavy team, which is awesome for an offensive lineman because you're not going to be asked to pass block 60 times a game. I think it's just a fantastic spot, and I think he'll be penciled in to start at right tackle from day one. So I think Nick has huge upside. He's a fantastic pass blocker. So him and Taylor Lewan really give him a really athletic, good set of bookends. As much as it pains me to give props to a Michigan guy, he is a great pass blocker. So it's going to be a good match in Tennessee for them. I was not stunned that the 3 receivers went right in a row. I thought it was a great endorsement for what our guys have been doing. Obviously JMO, another Ohio State guy that left the program, bet on himself, went to a powerhouse in Alabama, should have won the Biletnikoff last year. I think that him and Joe Burrow are 2 guys that, they're kind of like, adopted, not adopted, but they're people that we root for, even though they went to essentially the enemies with LSU and Bama. But it's always an interesting thing when kids move on and they go to the portal. And this is the perfect segue because we're going to get right into our show. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of this craziness that is going on in the portal. This doesn't even have Noah Potter, the 4-star defensive end that also joined, but this has Marcus Hooker, Andre Turritain, Jacoby Cowan, Bryson Shaw, Lechen Cavazos, Justin Went, who hasn't been on the roster in a couple years, Kermonte Hamilton, Seven Banks. I mean, and this doesn't even go back to Quinn Ewers and Jack Miller. And I mean, we've had a massive amount of movement portal-wise at Ohio State. Talk a little bit about it, Nevada. I mean, the portal obviously is a brand new element to college football. Talk a little bit about, obviously probably not many surprises on this list. Obviously, I think the biggest one was probably Quinn Ewers taking off after 3 months. But other than that, talk a little bit about the portal and, will we miss any of these guys? And does Ohio State need to get more aggressive in tracking some of these higher end transfers that are starting to hit the portal from smaller schools?
Well, I think the answer to that, is kind of a complicated one, but I'm going to start with a simple statement. And I want people to remember this because we've been saying this on the board, but people have to understand the concept of depth in college football right now is dead. And you have to change the way that you're looking at depth in college football because guys are not going to stand around at these big programs and not play the old idea, pair and a spare, being the second tackle, the sixth wide receiver, the third running back. I mean, those are the guys that are going to be leaving, and football fans have got to get used to that because this is the new world of the portal. It's kind of it's an adjunct to NIL where you've got teams that are weaponizing NIL and going after. So it's not just the small teams that big teams are poaching; it's the big teams that big teams are poaching. You see with the Pitt wide receiver potentially going to USC. You're going to see more and more of this type of action. In terms of the Ohio State portal losses, I think these are all guys that probably were best served by leaving. We wish them all the best. They just want to play, and they weren't going to play at Ohio State, and so these are good moves for them. But the second part of it, does Ohio State need to start getting more aggressive in the portal? They do. They absolutely do. You're seeing teams like USC, I think, has got 15 kids in the portal this year. 15. And Alabama is just feasting in terms of going out and getting starters from other SEC teams to come to Alabama. And Ohio State, I feel like we're kind of picking at the periphery of this, but I think we've really got to get engaged in this because other teams are getting markedly better via the portal. And I think Ohio State's kind of nibbling at the edges, but I think they got to go all in on this because things have changed. Ohio State has to change with it.
Yeah, and I think that the aggression turns up when there's a coaching change. Obviously, with Ed Ogeron leaving LSU, Brian Kelly coming in, I mean, they had a ton of guys hit the portal. Obviously, Louisiana State's basketball team is unbelievable. They don't have a single guy on scholarship. Their entire team hit the portal. I think with these coaching changes, there's potential opportunity to bag a star. And the kid from Addison from Pittsburgh, who was a Blitnikoff winner, superstar wide receiver, he just lost Cody Pickett, who just went in the top half of the first round to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he also lost his offensive coordinator. So it's like you're kind of looking around and you're like, well, who's is Keaton Slovis really going to lead me to the promised land, or should I go join Lincoln Riley, live for 1 year in Los Angeles before I hit the draft and play with their superstar sophomore quarterback? I mean, so it's a whole different dynamic now because these guys, they have to put themselves in the best situation, and you keep seeing these instances. And unfortunately, Ohio State has had probably the two most prominent examples where you have Joe Burrow leave from being a backup to Dwayne Haskins and becoming the number one pick in the draft at LSU. And then also, Jameson Williams, going from being our number 3/4 wide receiver, a guy that would have been, getting a few targets, but not and nowhere near the volume he got at Alabama. And he goes down and is a consensus All-American, top 12 pick. It's changed, man. It's changed the game. I mean, and who knows how good who knows how good Jackson Smith and Jigbo would have been last year, or if he would even stuck around if Jamo's there as the number 3-4, and they don't have that target share, and then we might not know who Marvin Harrison Jr. is, and you might not know who some of these younger guys are, and I don't think that these guys always get the best advice. I think a lot of these guys have handlers that are looking to make sure that they can get them to the NFL as fast as possible, get them the most touches, it is a very serious game now because the money is so huge, and these guys have to do what's best for them. And that's, the new optics of college football. When you don't have to sit out for a year anymore and you can just go whenever you want, you're looking for that Lincoln Riley, and I could be the number one guy in their offense, and they've had CeeDee Lamb and Hollywood Brown, and their number one guys usually go first round. So you look at that and you're like, well, might have to consider that. Any final thoughts on the portal mix? I don't even know if we're done. We might still have some more guys dropping. Like, Ryan Jacoby leaving the first week of camp opened my eyes, because he left the first week of training camp, went to Pittsburgh, started the bowl game for Pittsburgh. It never really stops, does it, Nevada? What are your final thoughts on the portal for this edition?
Well, I just think that the guys that Ohio State's fighting for now are really not the guys that you're normally thinking about, but it's guys like Enoch Vomahine and Evan Pryor and Julian Fleming. It's those guys right on the periphery that are not quite good enough to be starters, but valuable depth and guys that Ohio State doesn't want to lose. And so they're going to find creative ways to try to keep them involved. They're going to give the start of the moon. But those are guys that I keep an eye on, because that's the difference between having some depth and having no depth. And Ohio State's got to fight to keep those guys, because the competition is fierce.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys, like, they're kind of like, fruit on the tree. They're ripe. They're ready to go. I mean, Enoch could start at probably 90 out of 100 programs. I mean, Pryor was as good as anybody on the field at the spring game. He was explosive. And if I'm some of these teams, I'm looking at that kid, I'm like, man, he's better than anybody we got in the room. And at Ohio State, he's the number 3. He might get, 50 carries this year, instead of 300. And, again, it's one of those treacherous things, man. When you showcase these guys in a spring game, G. Scott really sure felt like he was featured. I mean, he had 6 catches or so. I mean, and you look at him, he's a big athletic body, missed the middle of spring ball for an unknown reason. I could probably pontificate what that reason was, it just so happened to happen when Cade Stover moved from linebacker back to tight end, so it was interesting that, you move back a guy who's probably going to be your starter. He's probably going to be a captain in Cade Stover. And, G. Scott all of a sudden is probably not super thrilled, because, Joe Royer's a stud too. So is G the number 2, the number 3? And again, when you're a kid like G, I mean, if you go to an offense that features the tight end and you're as big and as athletic and as fast as he is, I mean, he could be an All-American in the right system. But I don't know. And G came in rated higher than Jackson Smith and Jigba. Jackson Smith's probably going to be a top 5 to 10 pick this year, and G's kind of just trying to get on the field. So, you go to the right situation, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, this was the best decision I ever made. Because, J-Mo doesn't regret going to Bama. Joe Burrow doesn't regret going to LSU. Joe Flacco didn't regret leaving Pittsburgh for Delaware State. So, these guys all have to play to get into the league. They all want to play in the league. You got to have film and you got to produce. And that's like the hard part about where we're at now. And as the closing thoughts, I'm going to move on to our O-line, just because we've got, a lot of people were really worried about the depth on the offensive line. And I think what you said in terms of, my saying now is depth is an illusion anymore. I mean, Alabama lost 3 tackles in the portal. We lost 2 since last year in Max Ray and Ryan Jacoby. I mean, it's just the new normal. Like, the guys that would have been our second our second team left and right tackle, they both took off because they want to go start somewhere. And they're both going to, if Max Ray doesn't get hurt, he's probably starting for Colorado. Ryan Jacoby's going to start for Pittsburgh, and that's how it is. But, the offensive line really got dinged up. They were probably the most injured unit all of spring. You got Ben Chrisman, you've got Zen Mikulski, you've got Josh Frye, all guys that are expected contributors. I mean, the top 2 guys are probably our next 2 tackles. And even Josh Frye was in the mix to start last year before they decided to move Thayer into guard and put DeJuan in the starting lineup. But Josh Frye was getting a lot of reps with the ones. So, Nevada, talk a little bit about, O-line depth. And, me and you are the guys that we kind of carry the mail. We're like, guys, like, you're not going to have 6 5-star tackles on the roster anymore. Like, it's just literally going to be impossible, because these kids, they don't rotate in the game. They all want to play. They all want to go 3 and out and go to the league after 3 years. Talk a little bit about offensive line depth now with Ohio State and what people can expect in the future.
Well, I just think that, look, if you look historically at the offensive line position, it's the least injured position on the field. I think, short of kickers and you're only generally playing the guys that are getting the most snaps. It might go 7 deep, maybe 8 deep. So if you got 7 warm bodies, then you're generally in pretty good shape for Ohio State. And I think Ohio State goes at least that with the guys coming back. And just again, the new normal with Justin Frye and Pantoni. It's going to be incumbent upon those guys, if they have openings, you got to go to the portal. That's just the new way of looking at things. So you're not going to have 10, 11, 12 guys deep anymore, because like you said, nobody's going to stay around to play. And, again, fans have got to get used to that. They've got to adjust kind of their optics about how they look at the team and how they look at the depth, because you're not going to look at the depth chart and go, oh man, this guy's going to play 3 and 4 years out, because chances are if he's waiting, he's leaving. So I think it's gonna be really interesting to see how they manage that. Do they go to completely separate lines to kind of give some guys some playing time again, kind of like they did in the future? They did that in the past, like back when you were playing back in 06
Yep.
for that one wonderful series against Texas where they ran them in. But
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to do that again, or what the plan is in terms of trying to work through the OLine depth. But I'm not worried about OLine depth. I think Frye's got a handle on it. I think we've got more than enough bodies to do it. And if I'm wrong, I'll eat the crow. But people have been complaining about OLine depth for 20 years now. It's never really manifested itself in a serious way. And now with the portal, it's less important than ever, because you can go out and instantly fill your need from any one of 130 other teams that are basically have free agents that are available for you to pick.
Yeah, and we haven't been. I mean, outside of Jonah Jackson, who was a graduate transfer, he wasn't really a portal guy. We haven't really been able to nail a guy in the portal. We had Chad Lindsley from Alabama, who didn't pan out. He was terrible. But I think next year potentially could be our year to go shopping. Bama picked up a 3-year starter from Vanderbilt to fill in for Evan Neal at left tackle. We haven't been able to really go after guys because we've been pretty locked in at tackle. These kids that are or that are transfer portal guys, they want to know that they've got a clear path to start at left or right tackle if they're a tackle. And when you see, I mean, last year at this time it was, everyone thought it was going to be Thayer and Nick Petit-Frere at left and right tackle. Then obviously they moved Dewan in, and Dewan's stellar, and Paris. I mean, Paris, PJ is literally the number 1 rated tackle on pretty much every draft board right now for next year. So I posted on BuckeyeScoop.com that, there were online odds that were set that, the 4 highest rated guys, in terms of, odds for the number 1 pick, the number 4 guy was Paris Johnson, which, it might stun some people because, it was CJ Stroud, it was Bryce Young from Bama, and then their Will Anderson, their defensive end, who's a superstar. Then it was Paris. So, I mean, there's a really, 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 and Paris is going to graduate in 3 years. So, I mean, he's set to graduate this winter. So, there's a really high outcome that he's gone after this year. And I think that he'll play fantastic. He has more tools than maybe any tackle we've had since Orlando Pace. And then you've got DeWand, he's gone too. So, if there is a year where Ohio State's going to look really attractive to guys in the portal, it's going to be next year, because we're literally going to have 2 wide open tackle spots if PJ decides to go pro. I mean, DeWan's out regardless, but it's going to be, we haven't been able to really shop for those tackles. We tried with the kid from Florida International who ended up at LSU, but we couldn't nail him down because, when he looked at the depth chart and he saw PJ and DeWan, he's like, yeah, I can't beat those guys out. Screw that. I'm going to go to LSU where it's a wide open spot. But yeah, it's going to be real fascinating to see how this keeps cranking along. So I'm going to switch up to our good friend Jim Knowles. So Jim Knowles is in the spectrum of Nevadabuckdom of 20 years of you covering this. Where does he rank in terms of your excitement of hires for a new coordinator? Obviously, not going to touch head coaches because obviously getting Urban Meyer was huge. But where does Jim Knowles rank in terms of a coordinator hire in your years of covering Ohio State?
Well, it's the most excited that I've ever been, strictly because I think he can make the biggest impact. I mean, I thought the defense the last 2 years was some of the worst coordinated defenses that I'd ever seen, and I wish that I could say that it was a surprise. But if anybody's been listening to our podcast the last couple of years knows we talked about this. We talked about the fact that Kerry had never coordinated a defense before, and I love Kerry. I love him as a recruiter. I love his energy. I love his enthusiasm. I think he's been a great Buckeye and a great, representative of the university, but he wasn't a great defensive coordinator. He was inexperienced and he was in over his head. And a guy like Jim Knowles is just, a polar opposite. The guy's been a head coach. He's a literal genius and a guy that's coordinated defenses, and everywhere he's gone, he's improved the defenses dramatically. And I think now he's never coached this kind of talent before. And I just couldn't be more excited to see what he's doing with the defense. And I think we saw little glimpses of it in the spring game, even though it was vanilla. It just felt like it was a more coherent approach. We've talked about how they've simplified the defense. They've gone to just simple words like pirate or slam or gator for the defense. That gives the entire call, as opposed to red, white, swap, fly, monkey, jump, pull. They're literally going to one word for the defense, and that's making a big difference for guys. It's easier for guys to get lined up. They know exactly where they need to go. They understand the responsibilities, and I think that the defense is going to make a huge improvement this year, and I think it's all attributable to Jim Knowles.
Yeah, I love the one word thing when the one word gives you the front, the stunt, the blitz, if there is a blitz, the coverage. I mean, it's so simple, and people think that, well, that might be too easy for another team to pick off, but it really isn't. I mean, it's something that I always loved. I love simplicity because, kids have shorter and shorter attention spans. They're addicted to their phones. Every type of media in the world is getting shorter, TikTok, 15 seconds, Instagram, 30-second videos. And these kids, their attention spans are just dwindled down to nothing. So you have to adjust your coaching style and how you make calls. And I thought that obviously, the spring game, you can't get a ton from it, but I thought that the defense really flew around. They're coordinated. I mean, they didn't blitz a single time. They played base defense, but sometimes it's really fun to play base defense because guys can actually just play ball, not have to remember assignments, run to the football, tackle, rally to the ball. I think Jim is, quite frankly, in the most enduring of terms is a hard ass. I think he's going to get after these guys. I think he's going to make these guys play harder, because I thought something I was really critical of last year is I didn't think they played hard. I thought that they surrendered versus Michigan, and these are my boys, so it's hard for me to say that they did that. But when you give up 9.2 yards a carry in the second half, I don't know what other word to use other than you just surrender. And I think that Jim isn't going to accept that. And I also think that, he's a guy, he's here, he's got his girlfriend in Oklahoma. He doesn't have any kids living with him. So he is all football. And I talked to someone who I've known for a long time, and he said, when these coaches show up and they don't have a wife and they don't have little kids and their whole life is just football and cigars and eating like tofu and vegan food, those guys are really, really hard on the players. And I'm like, perfect, good. There's nothing that I would, if I was head coach, I'd say, Jim, you do whatever you want to do these guys. If you want to throw them off the top of Lincoln Tower, I'm good with it, because our defense was so bad last year. Whatever you think's got to get these guys to play hard and run to the ball and tackle guys and get there with some intensity, I'm all for it. So, and the guys that I know that have been around this guy, they love him. They know that he brings it every day. They know they're never going to be out schemed. And they know that, we're actually going to have a schematic advantage. I'm not going to quote Charlie Rice because that's like bad luck, but this guy really knows how to get guys lined up in the right spots. And he's a great guy at breaking down offenses, knowing how to attack them, knowing what hurts them. And I'm just excited to see what he can do with some of the talent we have, the Jack Sawyers of the world, the JT Tuimoloau's, seeing if he can get Zach Harrison to click and take that next step from being just an average guy, from being a fifth round guy and jumping into a first round, which he's got the ability to do, but he hasn't shown any of it so far. So really excited to see what he's got going. Any closing thoughts on Coach Knowles? I'm excited to see how he works with these guys at camp, these recruits coming in, and seeing how he does recruiting us some linebackers. But any final thoughts on Jim Knowles?
No, coaching matters. And coaching at the college level is almost determinative of success. And I've said that about head coaches, and I'll say that for defensive coordinators. Guys, they're not good by accident. And he's not going to be. People are going to watch the defense this year and go, oh my gosh, Ohio State just got talented on defense, and it's like, no, same kids, just a cohesive plan. And I'm all in on Knowles, and couldn't be more excited to see the team take the field in the fall.
Yeah, and I've talked to you now about the job that Kirby Smart has done at Georgia. Georgia always had incredibly talented football teams that always underachieved under Mark Richt. Kirby Smart shows up. He adds that toughness. He adds that Saban mentality. Magically, they have maybe the greatest defense in college football history last year because they already had the talent, but all of a sudden they got a guy who's going to get them going hard and effort and schematically very difficult to go against. So, I mean, coaching is so important in college football. So, finally, we're gonna go. We have a commitment incoming. Austin Siereveld is a kid out of Lakota East, which I don't know if we've ever had a kid out of Lakota East. We've had a bunch out of Lakota West. We had Brandon Maupin, Steve Rearing, Solomon Thomas. We've had a number of these kids from West. We're gonna watch some film here, but he's a mauler. He's a guard. It's always nice when you see on the offer sheet that Bama offered, and and it was a real offer, and they wanted the kid. Notre Dame and Harry Heaston offered. It was a real one. I'm gonna crank this film up just so that we can watch a little bit of him. But Nevada, go ahead and give your spiel on Ohio offensive linemen, because this is another Ohio offensive lineman we're about to get. This is going to be the third one in this class with Luke Montgomery and Josh Padilla. But give your spiel for the people that don't know about taking Ohio offensive linemen and why it's important to the core of Ohio State football.
Well, first of all, let's assume we're getting him, because that's our information. Our information is that he's announcing this week, I believe Wednesday, and that Ohio State's getting him. So if we don't get him, disregard everything that I'm saying.
Yeah, don't kill us.
But no, I think my theory on offensive line has been that it's historically the most difficult position to project success from high school to college, and kids get frustrated, they want to transfer. So having kids close to home, having hard-nosed kids, having Ohio kids on the offensive line, I just think is a great strategy for Ohio State. And again, I look back to the national championship team of 15, and that was 5 Ohio kids. A lot of them underrated. A couple of 3 stars, or maybe 3 stars, a couple of 4 stars. I mean, I think that if that was your strategy, if Ohio State just concentrates on the state of Ohio, gets the 3 or 4 best kids from the state of Ohio, and you sprinkle in with the out-of-state kids, or some kid that's got a connection to Ohio State somewhere nationally. But I'll be just fine with Ohio kids on the offensive line. I think if we did that every year, I think historically we'd be better off than chasing these 5-star kids, because people have to remember, it's all well and good to say, hey, let's just go get the 5 stars nationally. But you only have a finite amount of time and recruiting effort, energy that you have to go try to get these kids. And if you're chasing some kid from South Carolina and you're not getting him, well, that's time you could have spent going after somebody else. And for me, I love Ohio offensive linemen. I love kids that are versatile. I love kids that are tough. And this kid checks all the boxes, and I'm excited about him. Again, unless he goes somewhere else, and then I wasn't excited about him, and I changed everything that I said.
Yeah, I mean, most people are projecting him to Ohio State, so it would be a pretty significant shock if he does go elsewhere. But it's interesting. He plays in a wing T system, so you notice his pass set. He doesn't have much of a stagger. A lot of more pro style tackles will have this leg kicked a little further out. I mean, he's almost parallel in his stance, so he kind of has this funky pass set where he's kind of turning out of his stance. Again, this is something that based on his high school team. I mean, they're a very run heavy team. You can see it in his stance how much weight he has forward, but he falls on Mark again, I think they put Pantone in some pads right here and put him in 34, and he just body slams Pantone and jumps on him. So you can only go against the guys that they put in front of you. But he's they switch sides, so they probably run quick and strong tackle, which means they don't really run a traditional left and right, because throughout the game he's flopping sides the whole game. So it's not always to the tight end, it's not always to the open side, but he and honestly, I kind of like that. In high school, we did that. We did quick and strong. Georgia actually used to do that under Mark Richt, where you have a quick side, which is kind of like usually the open side tackle, then you have strong side, so just the tight end tackle side. But it's great for these kids because they get used to being out of a left and right-handed stance, which is great. And he's a physical kid. He plays hard. He loves to finish kids. You can tell. Again, knocks Pantoni to the ground, lays on him. Body slams him right here. I mean, Pantoni really doesn't have a prayer. Here's Pantoni again. They put Pantoni in the pads to evaluate him and just falls on him again. But he's gonna have to continually work on pass blocking. He did well at the Under Armour camp. He went against a bunch of guys that probably weren't very good. He didn't really see much big time pass rush potential when he went there, and he dominated. But he reminds me a lot of Jack Mewhort because he's got really thick ankles. He's got a great base. I mean, when you see him take a pass set inside at guard, especially, he really can lock guys down. He's a really strong kid. People weren't really getting an inch on him, but you can tell just by how he finishes his blocks. He loves to play nasty. He loves to lean on kids, kind of pile drive them. Some of these kids, I think that they just have like an off switch because this kid just falls down like all the time. So he's on the ground. He loves this trap move where, this kid's got his hands inside on him and he does this little swat down, this downward swat, and he keeps getting this poor kid and he just falls on the ground. So but it's a good technique to use. I mean, obviously he's been coached to do that, but he's a real physical kid. I mean, obviously he's going to project to play guard in all likelihood, but you never know. I mean, there's a lot of people that didn't think Josh Frye could play tackle, but he was repping at tackle for us all year last year and really was doing a nice job. So I think in a pinch he could play tackle, but he's going to be a guard. I think Luke Montgomery is a left tackle all the way. Josh Padilla is probably going to be a center. So, you have a center guard tackle in this class. I think that's a great start. Maybe try and go get a national tackle, obviously, would be great. But this kid, he comes off the rock. And again, this isn't like a traditional Big Ten, stance, because I mean this is probably like 4th and 1 because you can see a lot of these kids are in 4-point stances. These guys are, there's no secret what these guys are doing in this wing T offense. They're running a little short dive and he clears out his guy and they probably get a yard. And here he is at right tackle again. They flip the whole game, so I think that's just kind of their thing. They run right behind him, which is again it's another good sign when he's the guy that they always want to run behind because you see in these little short yardage situations he's the guy. But yeah, after watching a few clips in Nevada, you got any additional analysis? I love this. Watch the excitement. Again, this is probably to ice the game down, clinch it out. They're running right. I mean, this is a great, little crowbar. You crowbar them out, you push them out. They're running right behind you. You kind of make the hole. He knows he made the hole. Dumps the guy on his head. You see the excitement. Like I mean, there's some people don't like this kind of stuff, but I mean, when they know they're running behind you and you pry a guy out of there like this. I mean, he gets his hand inside. If he got to work this hand under, it would have been a little bit tighter and a little bit better. But the DN gets his hands high. He refits his hands, gets it under, and drives the guy out. And that's like just an amazing feeling, because they probably just iced the game down. Again, this is a wing T team. I mean, you're not going to see Ryan Day line up in this formation where you've got 7, fullback. You got your eye back and a 3-point. That's not what Ohio State does, but the kid comes off the rock. He's a physical kid. I love watching him. He's a real tough kid. But yeah, Nevada. I just went on for a hot minute. But any thoughts watching his film for the last few minutes? Watching an Ohio guy here.
No, it just reminds me of Billy Price. Looks like a kid that's strong, likes to play on the inside there. Like you said, the problem with those wing T kids is they don't know how to pass block, but as an interior guy, that's something he can kind of pick up as he goes to Ohio State. And I'll bet on the Ohio kids. I'll take a kid like this, and I'll trust with Justin Frye that he can coach him up, get him ready to play, go out there and do some things, and I think this is how you build kind of the core of Ohio State teams. I've never thought the core of Ohio State teams was necessarily the 5-star athletes. I've always thought it was the 3- and 4-star kids that really want to be there, that really want to play for the Buckeyes, and that really want to kind of bring that toughness and that team attitude. And I think a kid like this does that in spades, and that's why I'll be eagerly watching the commitment thing on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, he did that trap move. I'm going to rewind it back to, he loves doing this trap move in pass protection. It's a great way to combat a bull rush when a guy gets his hands into you right here. He's waiting on it. He's getting the bull rush. and he chops him, and the guy falls right on his face. Like I mean, he does this multiple times throughout his film. It's great technique. I mean, it really is. You know, if you're confident enough with it, because you got to kind of give up yourself for a second, and if you could get his hands off, he's gonna fall right on his ground. Here, you know, bulldozes the guy out of there. Again, you know, it's physical football. Like this isn't a traditional stance that you're going to see one of our guys get in just because they have to be more balanced to be able to pass block. But you know, when you got to run the ball, and they know you're running it. I mean, you might as well load up and come off the rock. I mean, this is almost like a stance you see like an Army or a Navy guy, you know, line up in and come off the rock. But it's he's a nasty kid. He loves finishing. He loves pancaking these guys, and I'm excited about him. I think he's gonna have a nice future. And you know, these are the kind of guys, like you said, they're the glue to the whole thing, because you need these tough kids that are prideful. They work hard. You know, and you throw him in there, and like a kid like this, you know, he's tough. He's not going to be scared, and I think he's going to do really nice things at Ohio State. So, with that, any closing thoughts on Austin Siereveld?
No, just like I said, I'm excited about him. I always say, be excited about every single commitment, because you never know who's going to be the good one, and that's been borne out so many times at Ohio State. You know, the top rated kids are the ones that, maybe they pan out, maybe they don't, and sometimes it's the lower rated kids turn up to the best ones in the class. So definitely something to be excited about.
Yeah, we just had Chris Olave go 11 overall, and I mean, he was, you know, a 3-star kid that was kind of an accidental discovery by Ryan Day and Zach Smith. And Zach, you know, and Ryan recruited him and got him here, and he turned out to be an absolute all-time legendary player at Ohio State from his freshman year on. So you never know. That's why I'm always excited about every kid we get here, because, you know, flat out, there are some kids that can't handle the college life. There's some kids that they sulk, they get homesick, they get depressed. I mean, I've seen superstar recruits that were ready to quit the team after a week because it was really hard, and they were used to dominating, and they're getting destroyed in training camp. I've literally seen a kid who was one of the highest rated kids in Ohio State recruiting history that was ready to leave and go home after 1 week, you know, and so you just never know. And that kid never ended up really panning out. I mean, he was a decent player, but he wasn't nowhere near what people were hoping and projecting he would be. So you never know with these kids. So that's why I'm like you. I like all of them. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I appreciate you, Nevada, as always. We're going to go to the end. Thank you guys again for attending. You know, comment on some of your favorite, maybe lower rated recruits that turned out to be superstars, guys that maybe you weren't excited about on signing day. They grew into be great players. Chris Olave is a great example of them. You know, Cardell Jones is a great example. Michael Thomas is a great example. But some of these guys that, you know, they were under the radar kids that really blew up. Again, thank you so much for tuning into this content. We really put a lot of effort into it. It's a blast to make for you guys. Please leave us a like and some comments. You know, subscribe to the channel. You're going to get on BuckeyeScoop.com. We'll be working hard tonight. Most active message board in the Ohio State's fan base, the most inside information, growing like crazy, and we appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for all you do. Thank you so much, Scoop family. Thank you, Buckeye Nation. You guys have a great rest of your day. Go Bucks.